When a fire suddenly erupted in my apartment in the middle of the night, I panicked and called home. My father said indifferently, "Handle your own problems. Don't drag us into this." I stood there in front of a pile of ashes. The next day, the investigating officer called me in and whispered, "This wasn't an accident. Someone planned this fire." Then he played the security footage, and the shadow that appeared on that screen was far more dangerous than anything I had imagined. I first saw an orange glow in my window, then the smell of burning, like plastic and wood melting together. I'm Reagan Clare, 56 years old, living alone in a small apartment in Lakeview, Chicago, and in that exact moment I knew it wasn't just a little smoke. My throat scratched, my eyes watered, and when I opened my door the hallway was wrapped in smoke like someone had hung a sheet of black cloth across the air. The fire alarm was screaming downstairs, but my fingers were shaking so badly the phone almost slipped out of my hand. The first number I dialed was home. My father. Ring, ring, then the line picked up. The same cold voice I had heard since childhood. I shouted, "Dad, my apartment is on fire. I'm standing outside. Everything I own is inside." He didn't even pause. "Handle your own problems. Don't drag us into this." I slowly lowered the phone from my ear as if the sound had slapped me across the face. Smoke and cold air wrapped around my hands. In front of me, my home, the place where I had spent 19 years trying to rebuild a life after raising my children, was slowly turning into ash. And my father had just made it clear what I meant to him. A burden. Before I go further, if you feel like something like this has happened in your family too, please like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now let me take you back to how all of this really started. If I'm being honest, this kind of cruelty in my family wasn't new. There are 3 of us siblings. I'm the oldest, then my brother Colin, and the youngest, my sister Delaney. I was always the one who gave. I picked up my father's medications every month. I spent the last 8 months of my mother's life driving her to the hospital and back. And when Colin's business collapsed in 2011, I quietly handed him my savings, $12,000, because I believed that's what family did. But in our house, family only seemed to apply to one person. Delaney. I still remember Christmas of 1998. I had bought my father a coat with my very first paycheck. Delaney gave him nothing but a card. My father never even said thank you to me. Instead, he read her card, smiled, and said, "My girl, you have the sweetest heart." I went into the kitchen and turned the faucet on so loudly that my hands went numb while I washed dishes. Then in 2007 my marriage ended. I came back to my parents' house with my 2 kids just for 6 weeks. I set up a folding bed in my mother's room. One night Delaney stopped me in the hallway. "You shouldn't stay here too long," she said coldly. "Dad doesn't like your drama." When I told my father what she'd said, he didn't even look at me. "You always bring problems with you, Reagan." That sentence settled somewhere deep inside me. You always bring problems. As if I wasn't a daughter. Just a disturbance. Even then I didn't cut them off. In 2019, when I rented my small 2-bedroom apartment in Lakeview, rent $1,650 a month, I called my father to tell him I had finally managed to stand on my own feet. He didn't congratulate me. He asked, "How are you going to pay that rent?" Then he laughed softly. "Don't worry. In the end you'll call us anyway." And I did call. Just not for help. The morning after the fire, at exactly 9:17 a.m. I got a call. Detective Henry Carwin. His voice sounded firm but tired in the way people sound when they spend their days looking at broken lives. "Miss Clare, could you come down to the station?" I put on the only coat that hadn't burned completely. My hair still smelled like smoke, like the fire had somehow followed me inside my own body. The police station smelled faintly of disinfectant. He led me into a small office. There was a file on the desk, 2 photographs, and a USB drive. He glanced toward the window, then leaned closer and lowered his voice. "This wasn't an accident. Someone planned this fire." A thin line of sweat slid down the back of my neck. "How?" I asked. "All I had was an old heater." He shook his head. "There were traces of accelerant near your apartment door." Then he nodded toward the corner of the room. That's when I noticed the woman sitting there. White hair. A plastic bag in her hand. Before she even stood up, I recognized her. My Aunt Mabel. My mother's cousin. 73 years old and never afraid to say exactly what she thought. The same woman who used to call my kids my little soldiers, and never came to visit without bringing something homemade. She walked over and handed me the plastic bag. I found this on the sidewalk outside your building, she said quietly. Someone must have dropped it running away. Inside the bag was a blue glove. And a small keychain. Gold letter D. Something tightened in my throat. That's Delaney's. The detective plugged the USB drive into the computer. Security footage appeared on the screen. 2:43 a.m. The alley behind my building. Wet pavement reflecting a streetlight. A shadow moving through the frame, hood up, face down, holding something in one hand. The figure stopped by the door. Bent down. A quick spark. Like a lighter. Then a fast movement like someone finishing a task and leaving. I held my breath. No, I whispered to myself. That can't be. But then the figure lifted its head slightly. The streetlight caught just enough of the profile. The nose. The jawline. The way she walked, like the world owed her something. I had seen that silhouette my entire life. My fingers gripped the chair so tightly they turned white. Aunt Mabel rested her hand on my wrist. I always knew that girl would cross a line one day. The detective asked quietly, any family disputes? Money? Inheritance? I tried to laugh but my voice broke instead. Last month I told my dad I wanted to look at the paperwork for my mother's old house. Just look at it. I had a feeling something wasn't right. I stared down at my hands. And that same night Delaney texted me. She wrote, mind your own business or I'll remind you where you belong. Pause for a moment. Has a sibling in your family ever taken everything for themselves? Write yes or no in the comments. Hit the like button if you're still with me. After that, I started preparing quietly. I pulled out every small thing I had ignored for years. The $12,000 transfer to Colin in 2011. The $5,400 I gave Delaney after her car accident in 2016. The jewelry that belonged to my mother that mysteriously disappeared in 2020. And the most important thing of all. My mother's will. A copy Aunt Mabel had kept. Dated March 14, 2018. The document clearly said the house would be divided equally among the three of us. But when my mother died, my father told us, there's nothing left. Just debts. At the time I didn't argue. I was tired of family fights. I just wanted peace. Now I wanted the truth. 2 weeks later my father announced a family meeting. Location: Delaney's new house in Naperville. I arrived carrying the quiet weight of everything I had learned. The only coat I had left was a plain black one I bought at a thrift store for $38. Inside the house the air smelled like cinnamon, like someone had carefully staged a warm family atmosphere. But Delaney's eyes were cold. Colin sat on the couch scrolling through his phone. My father sat like a judge. Delaney leaned against the kitchen counter. So, she said, why are you here? Looking for attention again. My father added, Reagan, stop running to the police. You're good at creating drama. I placed my bag on the table. It wasn't a weapon. Just the weight of the truth. I want to show you something, I said calmly. Inside, the decision had already been made. Aunt Mabel walked in behind me carrying the file. Delaney's face tightened. Why is she here? Because you set that fire, Aunt Mabel said plainly. And we're done pretending. The room went silent. Colin finally looked up. My father opened his mouth but no words came out. I placed 3 things on the table. The will. The police report showing the 243 timestamp. And a photograph of Delaney's keychain. I read aloud, March 14, 2018, Mother's will. The house is divided equally among 3 children. Then I looked directly at my father. You said there was nothing left. You lied. He cleared his throat. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I interrupted. I understand why Delaney panicked when I asked to see the paperwork. Delaney laughed nervously. This is all in your head. You always. My father repeated the line I had heard my entire life. You always bring problems with you, Reagan. For the first time I gave it back to him. No, Dad. I don't bring the problem. You raised it. Then Delaney destroyed herself. She lunged forward and grabbed the file. That house was mine, she shouted. I was the one taking care of Mom. Aunt Mabel cut her off calmly. Reagan spent 8 months there every night. You only showed up to take pictures. Delaney's hands began to shake. Then the truth came out. If I set the fire, so what? she snapped. She was dragging us into this mess. I just needed to stop her. Colin let out a broken breath. My father's eyes widened, and I simply blinked. My eyes burned, but the tears still didn't fall. I pulled out my phone. Detective Carwin, I said quietly, you told me if she said something herself, it would be recorded. The call had been on speaker the entire time. Delaney's face drained of color. There was a knock on the door. Police officers stepped inside. Delaney tried to step back but caught her foot on the edge of the rug. He stumbled, screaming. In that scream I heard the silence of my childhood. My father sank into his chair. Colin buried his face in his hands. And Aunt Mabel stood beside me. You're not alone anymore, Reagan, she whispered. Later everything changed. Delaney was charged with arson. For the first time in my life I spoke to a lawyer. The inheritance case followed my mother's will. 6 months. 2 hearings. I kept paying my $1,650 rent because I refused to give up. Eventually the house was sold and my share came through. I didn't buy anything fancy. I moved into a small ground-floor apartment in Lakeview and placed 14 plant pots near the window. A tiny nursery. For me that was life. One evening I looked at the burned keychain the detective returned after the case closed. I placed it in a drawer, not as a memory but as a boundary. A reminder of the day I finally said enough. My father came once after that. He stood at my door holding an envelope. Maybe an apology. But the words never came out. I didn't push him. I simply said, if you had ever truly seen me as your daughter, you would have come that night. Then I gently closed the door. Inside I opened the window. Fresh air drifted in. For the first time there was no smell of smoke. Thank you for staying until the end. Please like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to fight for your place in your own family? I read every comment. There's another story waiting for you in the description. Take care of yourself.